It's not my fault. She stared at me, eyes trembling behind those careful layers of composure. Her voice was shaky but firm, like someone insisting on a truth they'd rehearsed too many times. I said nothing at first. My mouth felt clamped shut, as if rusted from the inside. I stood there, letting the words settle, letting them bruise what was left of my pride. It was late, or maybe early. In that moment, I couldn't even tell the time. The house felt like a stranger's property, everything cast in the dim haze of a single lamp. Shadows twisted along the walls. Hers, mine, two silhouettes at war. Yet I remained silent. She glanced down at her hands. It was the same gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, a mixture of guilt and defiance. Maybe she believed she was telling the truth, or maybe the truth just had too many edges, slicing her from the inside. I waited for her to speak again. "Michael," she said softly, "look at me." I forced myself to meet her eyes. She had that haunted, hollow stare, like something inside her had corroded. And still, she whispered it once more, quieter. "I'm not guilty." But she was. We both knew it. I simply let her words linger in the thick air, caught somewhere between our shallow breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. If I could have conjured any emotion in that moment, rage or heartbreak or disgust, it would have torn this silence apart. But I felt cold. The kind of cold that sets in your bones when all you've known for years crumbles away without warning. And though I longed to break something, maybe the lamp, maybe her illusions, maybe my own delusions, I did nothing. I just stood there, silent, half dead inside. I should have seen it coming. That's the part that stings the most. I've been trained to notice details. Tiny inconsistencies, half-truths, suspicious patterns. I'd spent years in law enforcement, though at first I worked in the trenches of local police departments, responding to petty crime calls, bar fights, noise complaints. Over time, I graduated to more serious roles, working with investigators, picking up on the nuance of human lies. But the big lie in my life, my wife's betrayal, was the one I never wanted to see. I think everything truly began weeks before I confronted her. It began with a phone call. Not from her, not from some friend trying to break me the news, but from a stranger. It was early evening, a day like any other. I was at my desk, finishing an incident report for a new department I'd just joined in Charlotte, North Carolina. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but some pull, maybe a premonition, made me pick up. A man's voice, hushed, almost conspiratorial. "Mike, are you Michael Reynolds?" I said yes, cautious. "Who's calling?" He paused, as though weighing the risk of continuing. Then he sighed, voice low and tense. "I'm a taxi driver," he said. "Sorry to bother you. I got your number from a mutual acquaintance. I can't say who. But look, I have a passenger in the back right now. A woman. She's been talking on her phone with someone. Laughing. Talking about meeting a man tonight. At a hotel. It's none of my business, but she described you, her husband, like you were a stranger. I overheard enough to piece together your name. You gotta believe me, I never do this. But something about the way she was talking, it made me uneasy. Like I needed to warn you. I didn't speak. My chest tightened, blood pounding in my ears. Warn me about what exactly? I asked finally. She's your wife, right? Dark hair, mid-30s, works in marketing. She's with someone else. Those words hit with a force that made me grip the phone too hard. My knuckles turned white. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. Couldn't breathe. A sour taste crawled up my throat. "How do you know who I am? Why are you telling me this?" I forced out. He was silent for a long moment, or maybe it just felt long. "I saw a picture. On her phone, some background with you in it. She was flipping through, and I recognize you from around the station. My brother's a cop," he admitted quietly. I put two and two together. "I'm sorry. I just thought you should know." Then the call dropped. Just like that. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling the edges of my life buckle. The rational part of my mind told me to question every detail. Maybe it was a hoax, a random guy with a sick sense of humor. But the voice in my gut, and years of reading people's hidden secrets, told me he was telling the truth. The background conversation I overheard in the last seconds of the call had that familiar ring. Becky's laugh. Bright, melodic, a laugh that used to be reserved for moments we shared. Now it was an echo from another life. I'd had suspicions for months, but kept pushing them aside. A shift in her routine. A new perfume she wore only on nights she claimed were work dinners. The tired excuses, the phone always face down on the kitchen counter. Messages typed quickly, then deleted. And that subtle distance in bed. A hush, an absence. I tried to act like it was normal. Just the lull of a marriage that had been battered by time and daily stress. I never believed I'd be the man with the unfaithful wife. That kind of thing happened to other people, not me. But the final straw didn't come from the phone call alone. It came from Becky herself. She made a mistake. She wrote something in the wrong chat. Our shared family chat, ironically called No Secrets, where we kept old pictures, inside jokes, notes about groceries or bills. The message was short but devastating. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was intense. Let's do it at my place next time. He won't be home. I remember reading it, blinking, rereading. My mind scrambled for excuses. Maybe she was messing with me. Some twisted sense of humor. But I checked her direct messages, the list of recent conversations. One name kept popping up. Angelo. The tone of their chat was unmistakable. Sensual. Familiar. I realized I'd been a fool. I confronted her that evening. She was in the living room, laptop open, analyzing marketing metrics. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding so hard I could barely speak. Becky, I saw what you wrote. She froze. Which part? Our chat. I said quietly. You wrote him in our chat, not your private one. Her expression shifted from confusion to terror. All blood drained from her face. She swallowed. Tried to say something, failed. I expected outrage. Accusations that I was snooping. Instead, she just stared at me like a cornered animal. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then, in a trembling voice, she said, just let me explain. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. All I felt was a heavy coldness, a sense of inevitability. She started to speak, some desperate string of half-truths. But I turned around and left, shut the bedroom door behind me. I was never good at immediate confrontation. In that moment, I felt like a piece of my soul had peeled away. A man undone by his own illusions. I thought about confronting him. Angelo, the unknown man behind the text messages. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear of stooping so low. Maybe it was that odd sense of decorum the uniform taught me. We investigate properly. We gather evidence. We do not lash out blindly. I ended up burying myself in work, trying to push it aside until I got some kind of clarity. But clarity never came. Instead, the next time I found out about them, it was more brutal. I was off duty, skipping lunch, driving around the city with no real direction. Just an impulse to find her if I could. Stupid as it sounds, I had a feeling she was out there, with him, at that moment. And then I saw them. I recognized her sit-in parked near a boutique hotel downtown, one that catered to traveling business people. My heart pounded so loud I wondered if passersby could hear it. Part of me said, don't go in. Just drive away. Another part, stronger, forced me to park. I had no plan. I walked into the lobby, tried to act casual. The clerk was busy, phone pressed to one ear. I quietly took the elevator, scanning the floors. I had no room number, no clue. But I checked the events board. There was a small business conference on the 3rd floor. Marketing and sales. She'd used that excuse before. I ascended to the 3rd floor, stepped out, ignoring the soft music overhead. Doors to conference rooms lined the hallway, and in the distance, a small lounge area with plush chairs. That's where I saw them. She was leaning against the corridor wall, her hair tousled, face flushed. He stood close, an inch away, whispering something. He was tall, well-built, wearing a fitted suit. Angelo. He moved with the confidence of a man who had everything he wanted. His hand rested lightly against her waist. Her fingers toyed with the lapel of his jacket. Neither of them noticed me. I walked closer, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Her eyes were bright, the same eyes she used to turn on me in the early days of our marriage. She was smiling. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It was slow, unhurried. She gripped the back of his head. I felt a wave of sickness deep in my gut. The hallway spun. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. But I forced myself to watch, forced myself to confront it. When he pulled away, she said something in a low, teasing voice. She glanced at a side door, presumably a storage or a staff room. He nodded. She took his hand, guiding him with an eagerness I'd never seen from her in a long time. I followed. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see how far she would go in a public place. Maybe I was punishing myself. The door led to a narrow corridor. They disappeared around a corner. The corridor was lit by a single overhead bulb. I stopped just before I turned the corner. And I heard them. Kisses, ragged breathing, soft moans that cut through me like shards of glass. Her voice whispering his name, Angelo, in that needy tone. Then a half-choked laugh as clothing rustled. It was enough to give me a vivid, agonizing picture in my mind. That was my wife, my Becky, in a dark corner of a hotel corridor, pressed against a wall by another man. Desire in her voice. Abandon. The intimacy I thought we still shared was now a casual secret she gave away so easily. Part of me wanted to barge in, confront them, maybe even knock him to the ground. But I stood there, heart thunderous, fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. Then, just like that, I took a few steps back, turned around, and I left. As I trudged down the hallway, I glimpsed our reflection in a large window. I looked like a man who died on his feet. A phantom. No one else in the hallway even noticed me. The city outside bustled on, oblivious to my personal collapse. I confronted her that night, though confronted is a strong word for the cold, measured exchange that took place in our living room. She was home already, wearing casual clothes, hair freshly brushed, like she'd had time to recompose herself. When I walked in, she stood, arms folded, eyes flickering with guilt. I half expected her to try denial again, but she didn't. She let out a trembling breath. We both knew there was no point in lying anymore. I said nothing. That was my move. Silence. I could see she was waiting for an outburst, but I had none to give. My anger was too deep for words. Instead, I swallowed the bitterness, forced myself to speak calmly. I saw you. At the hotel. She looked away. Her bottom lip quivered. I guess I should say I'm sorry. I stared at her for a beat. The apology was so hollow, it almost made me laugh. But I didn't. I just nodded once, like I was taking an official statement. Her voice cracked. I never meant. It's not. She paused, started again. Michael, I swear I didn't plan for this to happen. It just, Angelo and I. God, I don't even know how to explain it. I'm not blaming you, but, my voice was low, rasping with suppressed emotion. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I felt alone. We drifted. You were always at work, always dealing with your stress on your own. We barely touched, and Angelo, he made me feel alive again. Alive again. The phrase stung, as if I'd been the one to kill her spirit. Maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe it was just her perspective. I didn't lash out. I was beyond that. All I could manage was a tired question. So what now? She said nothing. I watched her struggle with words, like she wanted me to carry the conversation, to place the blame, to give her an exit strategy. I refused. My coldness must have scared her. She wiped tears with the back of her hand, then whispered, "I don't know." That night, I slept on the couch, or tried to. My mind spun relentlessly, replaying the sound of her hushed laughter with him, the taste of betrayal in my mouth. I felt hollow, as if some crucial part of me had been carved away. It was the loneliness that crushed me most. To be married yet so thoroughly abandoned. All those nights we spent side by side, and she'd been emotionally gone. I stared at the living room ceiling, waiting for dawn. Days passed in a fog. We existed under the same roof, but we barely spoke. She texted me once in a while, short questions about groceries or bills, as if we were polite roommates. I avoided her as much as my schedule allowed. And then the strangest thing happened. Another message from that same unknown taxi driver. This time, just a voicemail. I played it, my heart pounding. "Hey man, I shouldn't have called you before, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. Listen, I saw her again. She was at a cafe, talking to a guy. Might have been the same one. I kept my distance. Are you okay?" I erased the message. I didn't need his concern or pity. Still, something in that moment shifted. I realized how much this betrayal was known by others, whispered about. I felt humiliated, small. My world had become the subject of hushed rumors. I decided I wouldn't let her break me. If she wanted out, she could have asked for a divorce, or at least told me she was unhappy. But cheating, this quiet sabotage, showed me exactly who she'd become, and perhaps I saw who I was too. A man who'd let the job define him, burying his emotions until it was too late. We were both to blame, in different ways, but the final push had been her choice. Something snapped inside me, but not in the way you might expect. I didn't scream or threaten. I never laid a hand on her. Instead, I packed a small bag, took a few days off from my new job, and left a note. "I need to breathe. Don't wait up." Then I drove for hours, letting the open road devour my thoughts. Eventually, I found a cheap motel on the outskirts, a place where the neon flickered and the walls smelled of stale smoke. It was perfect for a man who felt half dead. During those days, I planned. I'm not proud of the directions my mind wandered, but I needed to come to terms with how to confront my wife's double life. My first idea was to ruin Angelo. In law enforcement, you learn things, ways to dig into people's backgrounds, to exploit weaknesses. But I told myself, the law is not a weapon for personal vendettas, and even if I found dirt on him, it wouldn't fix anything, wouldn't mend the severed trust. A second idea was to punish Becky, publicly. Humiliate her in front of her colleagues, maybe even gather evidence of her affair and send it to her boss. But that felt cheap, vindictive. The more I thought about revenge, the more I realized it would only confirm how deeply she'd hurt me. I wanted something else, a truth that would stand on its own. So I returned, eventually, to the house. She was still there. She looked at me like she had 1,000 questions but couldn't form them. I just nodded and said, "We need to talk." She swallowed, nodded back. We ended up in the living room, the same place where I'd confronted her. I stayed standing while she sat, knees pressed together, arms folded, as if bracing for impact. The silence stretched. When I finally spoke, my voice was clear but hollow. "I won't destroy you," I said. "If that's what you're afraid of." She exhaled shakily, tears gathering. "Michael, thank you. But we're done," I continued, ignoring her gratitude. "Emotionally, we're done. You made your choice." She opened her mouth, maybe to protest, but no words came. I could see the guilt warring with her own anger or confusion. "I never wanted to lose you," she whispered. "I know how ridiculous that sounds." I nodded, feeling the numb acceptance settle in. "I believe you never wanted it to end like this. But it doesn't matter. What's done is done." We said no more. The next day, she left for work in a crisp business suit. I watched her drive away. In that moment, I felt an emptiness so vast it was almost peaceful. Shortly after, I got an offer to join a specialized investigative unit. It was the break I'd been waiting for. A chance to bury my pain in a demanding job, to cloak myself in procedure and discipline. Ironically, Becky had once encouraged me to aim higher, to chase a bigger role in law enforcement. Now she didn't say a word about it. She barely looked at me. Our mealtime interactions were mechanical, an exchange of stifled pleasantries. Some nights she didn't come home. She claimed it was work. I knew better, but I refused to crumble. I poured myself into the job, taking on every assignment, every lead. My colleagues had no clue how broken I felt inside. The training, the daily briefings, the adrenaline of fieldwork, it became a shield, a place where I could function without the baggage of betrayal pressing on my heart. And in that professional environment, I started to track her, in a sense. Not illegally, not using the department's resources for personal ends, but I was watchful, guided by my instincts. I had a sense that Becky and Angelo would eventually slip up in some public way. And slip up they did. One afternoon, weeks into my new position, I was called to do a routine verification at a local corporate office, some minor fraud investigation. Stepping into the building's marble lobby, I scanned the official directories. My eyes fell on a marketing consultancy firm's listing. The same name Becky had once mentioned as a major client. My heart thumped. Could it be that she and Angelo were there, forging new business deals, or personal liaisons? I took the elevator up, feeling my pulse quicken. The hallway was sterile, bright, with sleek glass doors. I approached the front desk, showed my credentials to the receptionist, who led me to a small waiting area. The clock ticked loudly in my ears. My mind conjured images of Becky in a crisp suit, meeting Angelo in some corner office. I almost laughed at how fate had orchestrated this twisted scenario. Then I saw her. She stepped out of a conference room with two men in suits. She looked as professional as I'd ever seen her, dark hair pinned up neatly, a charcoal blazer hugging her frame, matching skirt, modest heels. Her expression was guarded, her posture rigid. But what struck me most was her eyes, like they'd lost their warmth, replaced by a calculating distance. It was the look of a woman who wore a mask every day, trying to hide from the fallout of her own betrayal. She froze as soon as she saw me. The men beside her glanced my way, recognized the badge, and politely excused themselves. They left us standing in that polished corridor, a hush enveloping us. My throat felt tight, but I managed to speak in a level tone. "This is official business," I said almost apologetically. Her gaze flickered. "I'm sure it is," she replied quietly. We stood there, two strangers with too much history. Then I saw him. Angelo emerged from around the corner, leading another group of business associates. He carried a leather folder under one arm, looking every bit the successful financial consultant. Our eyes met. There was a flash of recognition, then caution. He slowed his steps. Becky took a half step back, as if wanting to dissolve into the background. I simply stared. He stared back. His expression was a mix of confidence and unease, like a man who knows he might be walking into a confrontation. But I was done with outbursts. Instead, I turned to Becky. "Where do I sign in?" I asked, voice so neutral it startled even me. She directed me to the reception block. Angelo stood there, saying nothing. For a moment, I thought he might extend a hand or try some half-hearted apology. But he didn't. He just watched me in silence, probably measuring whether I'd strike him or not. I didn't. When I finished with the register, I pivoted on my heel and walked away, leaving both of them behind me in that uneasy corridor. I never sought to destroy Becky's life. If anything, I wanted her to confront what she'd done, to wear the face she had created for herself without my illusions clouding it. In a moment of bleak inspiration, I commissioned a piece, a mask shaped like her face, not a cheap carnival item, something meticulously crafted by a local artist I knew, detailed enough to capture her features, but blank, soulless. I left it for her on the kitchen table, just as a gift. No note, no explanation. When she saw it the next morning, she let out a small gasp. Her eyes darted to me. "What is this?" she demanded, voice hushed. I just watched her, staying silent for a long time. Finally, I said, "It's for you. Wear it if you want." She lifted it, studying the uncanny likeness, her face molded in plaster, empty eye holes. "Why would I want to wear this?" I shrugged. "Because the truth took your real face away," I murmured. "That's all we have left now, anyway." A tremor ran through her. She set the mask down like it was something cursed. "You're punishing me," she whispered. I looked at her without anger. "No, I'm just showing you who you are now to me." A face I recognize, but with nothing behind it. Her cheeks flushed, tears pooling in her eyes, but I gave her no comfort. That moment was the closest I came to revenge. Except it wasn't an act of brutality. It was a simple statement. "I see you. You can't hide." After that, she never wore the mask, never even touched it. It remained on the table for days, a silent presence that followed her whenever she crossed the room. Eventually, she tried stashing it in a drawer. I didn't protest, but I noticed her hands trembled when she did it. She looked shaken, like it was the ultimate condemnation of her guilt. Over time, I thought I would move on. But betrayal has a way of lurking in your veins. Even as I focused on my law enforcement duties, gathering testimonies, studying case files, going on stakeouts, I felt that quiet, gnawing emptiness. Sometimes I dreamed of her laughter with him, haunted by images of them together in that dark corridor. It started to fuel my determination on the job. I told myself, if I can't fix my marriage, I can at least uphold the law, do something right. That was how I rationalized the sleepless nights and extra shifts. I'd see Becky occasionally in the morning, or late at night if she happened to come home. We kept conversations minimal, out of necessity, discussing only the bare essentials about bills or the house. Oddly, she never mentioned divorce. Maybe she was afraid of the finality. Maybe she thought I'd do it for her. We existed in a strange limbo, two ghosts in the same dwelling. Angelo, for his part, seemed to fade from direct confrontation with me. I suspected they still saw each other, though more discreetly now. Part of me was aware, part of me didn't care to confirm. I had let go of the fight. I was done stabbing myself with the details. The day I realized I truly didn't care anymore was the day I felt a faint sense of relief, as though the old me had died and left behind a shell that simply operated out of habit. Then came the final confrontation, months later. It felt almost anticlimactic, except for the tension burning underneath. I was called to that same corporate office building for a follow-up, something about new evidence in a complex white-collar crime case. I arrived wearing a plain suit. My department mandated it for certain interviews. My badge glinted from the breast pocket. The receptionist directed me to a side corridor on the 15th floor, where a cluster of offices were under observation. I stepped into an unremarkable room, finding a single desk, some chairs, fluorescent lights overhead. The woman behind the desk gave me a perfunctory nod. She asked me to wait while she retrieved documents. I stood there, feeling strangely on edge. The hallway beyond was quiet, lined with identical doors. Then one door opened, and Becky stepped out, flanked by two associates. My heart clenched. She was wearing a strict navy suit, hair pinned, posture rigid. She looked older, maybe from the stress, or maybe from the weight of our silent war. She saw me, and for an instant, that carefully controlled expression wavered. The men with her nodded politely to me, then turned away, leaving us alone in the corridor. She cleared her throat. "Work again?" she asked, voice so neutral it could have been a coworker's greeting. I gave a curt nod. "Follow-up investigation." She looked at me closely, as if searching for any sign of the man she once married. I let her see only my professional calm. "Michael," she said, Voice low. Did you ever think we might fix this? She motioned vaguely between us. I exhaled, the faintest hint of a laugh escaping my lips. Fix what, Becky? There's nothing left to fix. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I'm sorry, she whispered. I held her gaze, searching for that old spark, but it wasn't there. I know, I answered, and meant it. It didn't matter anymore. We were past the point of apologies and restitution. Past the point of love and heartbreak. What remained was an icy acceptance, a fact, like gravity. I turned to leave, to go about my assignment. But she touched my arm lightly. Michael, wait. Her voice shook. You never. I thought you'd blow up. That you'd yell. Threaten me. Threaten Angelo. You never did. I looked down at her hand, then up to her eyes. I had the power to do more harm. I had the means, but I didn't need to. In the end, telling the truth is stronger than any revenge. She let go of my arm. Tears welled, but she held them back, nodding. I see, she said quietly. We stood there, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the hush of an otherwise deserted corridor. I saw in her eyes a reflection of the mask I'd given her, an emptiness of identity. She had become a stranger, someone I recognized only from old memories. The real Becky was lost the moment she decided to betray me. She didn't realize it at first, but betrayal is like acid. It eats away at who you are, not just the person you betray. I stepped away, and for the first time, I felt a weight lift from my chest, as if the final door had closed on that chapter of my life. She stood there, shoulders trembling, lips parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. Cold or not, that was my last emotion for her, a distant, final acknowledgement of what we had been, and what we could never be again. In the end, I did file for divorce. Quietly, swiftly. Our marriage had become a husk, a shell that only reminded me of what we'd lost. She didn't contest it. She didn't fight. Maybe she knew there was no use. The papers went through. We sold the house. I kept to my new job, my new identity as a man who had endured betrayal and come out the other side not unscathed, but hardened. I never wore a ring again. She moved out to a smaller place in the city. Angelo presumably kept drifting in and out of her life. Though I never confirmed, I no longer cared to. She could wear any mask she wanted, but not in front of me. Sometimes, late at night, I think of the past, how she used to laugh at my jokes, how her eyes lit up when we were newlyweds dreaming of a better future. I feel a pang of regret, of memories that were sweet once. But it's not heartbreak anymore. It's an echo. I learned that betrayal doesn't always burn bright with fury. Sometimes it just chills you to the core, until all that's left is the numb acceptance that you can't go back. People say that coldness isn't an emotion, but they're wrong. Cold can be the strongest emotion of all, because it's what remains when everything else has died away. I can't say I'm happy now. Happiness is a big word. But I found a strange, steady calm in my life, a truth that feels more honest than any illusions of perfect love. Maybe that's all a man can hope for when the dust settles. The last time I saw Becky was months after the papers were finalized. I was leaving a small coffee shop downtown, sipping a black coffee in the crisp morning air. She passed by on the sidewalk, carrying a laptop bag, her phone pressed to her ear. She wore a tailored skirt, heels clicking on the pavement, hair neatly styled. Our eyes locked for the briefest second. She paused her conversation, gave a tiny nod. I inclined my head in return, a silent greeting. Then we walked on, each continuing our separate paths. No words exchanged. That was it. No final confessions, no second chances. Just a tired acknowledgement between two people who once shared a home, a bed, a life, and now shared only a memory. Maybe that's the most honest moment we'd ever had. Sometimes, when I drift into uneasy sleep, I dream about a house with warm lights, the faint smell of coffee, and a woman I used to hold. But in the dream, I can never see her face. The details fade every time I try to look. When I wake, I lie there in the dark, feeling more alone than ever before. But I remind myself, I'm not the one who walked away. I stayed, I confronted, I endured, and I survived. If you asked me what revenge really means, I'd say it's letting the person see themselves for who they've become. It's not about destruction or violence. It's about revelation. That mask I had crafted, the one that looked just like her, only hollow, was my silent statement. You can't hide from what you did. Wear your true face. She refused to wear it, of course, and that, in a way, was the real punishment. In the quiet of my new apartment, sometimes I catch myself reliving old arguments, old regrets. I recall her words, "I'm not guilty," and the way she tried to cling to that belief. Maybe she meant it in her own twisted sense. Maybe she felt justified or cornered by her loneliness. But guilt is a funny thing. It hides in the corners of your mind, whispering, reminding you of what you did when you think no one was watching. If she's truly not guilty, she won't need a mask. But I suspect she'll always feel its presence. As for me, I won't lie and say I'm grateful for the experience. Betrayal hurts. It crushes your faith in people. But it also clarifies. I used to think marriage was an unbreakable bond, something that would withstand anything if you worked hard enough. Now I know people break it themselves, sometimes for reasons they can't even articulate. And you can't stop them if they've already decided to leave you, physically or emotionally. I've learned that I can carry on, a solitary figure who doesn't need illusions. I've learned that law and order are easier to enforce on the streets than in your own home. And I've learned that sometimes the strongest statement is to do nothing at all. Simply expose the lie and watch it wither under its own poison. Becky taught me that, or maybe I taught myself. Either way, it's over. She'll carry her guilt or innocence, her regrets or triumphs, into a future that no longer involves me. She'll remember the mask and probably hate me for it. But she'll know, every time she looks in the mirror, that she lost something real when she chose betrayal. And me, I stand here now, finishing this story in the same voice I started with, detached, almost dead. My pulse is steady, my breathing calm. I'm not raging or shouting. I'm simply telling you what happened, because sometimes the most powerful emotion is the one that's so cold it no longer burns. And that, I've discovered, is how a man survives a betrayal that once threatened to tear him apart. I speak as though I'm already gone, but I'm still here, living day by day. She's the one who's missing now, missing from my life, from my future. In her place is a hollow shape, like a plaster cast someone forgot to fill. Let that shape remain. It's a testament to the truth we can't avoid. Sometimes the emptiest place is exactly where a person stood. And that's all there is to say. Let the silence have the final word.